On Tuesday, June 28th, Irv Gotti announced a $300 million deal that sees himself 50% ownership stake of his masters to Iconoclast, founded by French-born music industry power player Olivier Chastan. Iconoclast entered the music rights acquisition arena in February by purchasing the rights to rock legend Robbie Robertson's music publishing and name, image, and likeness.
Who the hell is Duane Allman? Oh, he's part of the Allman Brothers. Well, the Allman Brothers are related to Southern Rock, so maybe you will get me to Lynyrd Skynyrd. And from Lynyrd Skynyrd, they were produced by Al Kooper. He's going to get me to Blood, Sweat, and Tears. Right? Fashion, you can have bad press. You Steve Madden, you go to jail. Your brand could go to zero. Music will never go to zero. I mean, think of Michael Jackson, what happened to him, or you fall in love with an artist that nobody necessarily heard about, and nobody necessarily cares about, and it's very easy to get carried away. I just found Led Zeppelin. The record business was way down. I mean, that's the worst of years. That's when Napster and all of those are picking up. And so we're getting hammered.
When people ask you what you do, how do you answer?
Well, the business I'm currently, which I started and currently running, is really focused on the management of iconic artists, celebrities, creators in general. So really the job is simple: is how do you market, grow, and perpetuate the really the relevancy of those icons. And I think that's the simplest way to think about it. So it's really a brand management company that happens to also owns its own rights. Right, so I'm managing the brand of, let's say, Tony Bennett, Marianne Faithfull, or iconic musical artist. But we don't just manage it like a manager would. We also own the rights. So it's sort of a comprehensive strategy where it encompasses the entire legacy and intellectual property of those artists, and that's what we manage.
So we're gonna dive into this in a little bit.
Yep.
Can you kind of walk us through the entire ecosystem in the music industry? Because there are like artists, managers, record companies, labels. Like it's confusing for anyone who's not in there. Like what's the ecosystem? Who pays whom? And how do they coexist?
I got to get my whiteboard. So the way I think about it all the time is to break it down into three main components, right? So you've got the creators and the ones that own the rights of those creators, right? So, and I'll go back to what those are. Then you've got what I would consider the infrastructure. So let's say distributors, publisher societies, etc. And then the third part is really the performance side, which I don't really deal with that much. Think of it as a live business, which really intersects with what we do, but we don't really deal with it. When you're on the IP, on the rights ownership side, you're not terribly involved with that side. You have some points of, again, intersection, overlap, but in the end of the day, it's not the main concern or the main focus. So to take a step back, the best way to think about it is in a very linear manner. You start with the creation, right? So you and I have a band, right? And we just wrote a song and we're recording that song and now we want to put it out. And so we've created intellectual property out of thin air, which is one of the incredible thing in music, is that it absolutely does not exist until it's recorded. You don't know about it, but there is a right? So the first step is to separate the songwriters. You and I write a song, just like Lennon and McCartney wrote, Let It Be, let's say. And then that song, which is called the music publishing, which you probably have heard about, can be recorded by you and I, but could also be recorded by Ariana Grande, or could be recorded by, could have been recorded by Frank Sinatra if he had been alive. I mean, that song can take any kind of form, shape, etc., but it remains one single initial copyright. So I like to start from the songwriters. The person that wrote the song is literally the blood of our business and is the source of our business. They wrote a song, and then that song can take a lot of different lives, right? It could become, a version could be a hard rock song, another version could be, a ballad. I mean, you can imagine that song any way you want, right? So we've established now that the music publishing, the songwriting, is its own entity, its own right. Then it becomes recorded, as I was mentioning, right? So that's when, in the old days, would have been on an LP, on a vinyl, or on a CD, and now obviously is a digital file that gets streamed, can be downloaded, can be played on YouTube, on Pandora, Sirius XM, I mean, you name it. Even in your podcast, you could decide to use that song and make it the theme song or the background music for, the rolling credits, whatever it is. So that recording is basically a copy or an interpretation and a performance of the songwriting onto a fixed format, right? Audio format. That is really what it is. So that's the performer, right? You've got the songwriter and then the performer. That's the first step. Those two combined usually would have their own rights, right? As I mentioned, the songwriter has music publishing rights. The performer has sound recording rights, and they can decide to put it out themselves. Really, the part of our business that has been exploding over the past few years, which is self-distribution, self-administration of your rights, because of the disintermediation that has happened because of digital. You don't necessarily need an intermediary, right? You don't need a record label. You don't really need a publisher, etc. You do. We'll go back to that later. But at the end of the day, you can make that choice. Mm-hmm. And so they can decide that they want to go through suddenly what I mentioned, the infrastructure of our business. And that could take two forms. You say, look, Columbia Records, Sony, Warner, Universal Music, take my recording, take my sound, my music publishing rights, and go out and distribute, collect income for me, promote it, etc. So the way to think about it, again, the songwriter will go to a music publisher. The music publisher will send what is really metadata when you think about it, right? When I mentioned that it's created of thin air, a composition does not really exist until it's recorded. You could make an argument that it exists if you were to write it down, on sheet music, but at the end of the day, it does not exist until it's recorded. But that right has to be protected, and the income that flows to it has to be collected. So the best way to think about it, Asnor, is I wrote a song, I go to a music publisher, and they're going to send that copyright information, that metadata really, but it's really copyright information throughout the world. So the Italian Collection Society for Songwriters will know that the song that we wrote, right? Let's say we call it, Podcast, our beautiful song, is 50% written by Asnor Midov and 50% by Olivier Chastan. We have equal credit on it. And what happens is you can decide, for example, one day you say, you know what, that song is doing pretty well. It's making, let's say, $100,000 a year. I now want somebody to represent me to go collect all that income and do a better job. So you go to Warner Chappell or Universal Music, where whoever it is, and you're now saying, can you please ensure that my copyright is properly registered, recorded, present in all societies? So I was mentioning Italy, but it could be North Korea, so South Korea, not North Korea, obviously. It could be, in India, could be in the US, could be in South Africa, etc. And all they do is say, okay, if you happen to be playing that song, please pay Warner Chappell or Universal. They collect the income and they bring it back to you, right? So that's the best way to think about it. That's on the music publishing side. On the record side, it's much simpler in some aspect because obviously you have more familiarity. A distributor will come, or a record label, and say, okay, I'm the representative of that sound recording, either as a rental agreement, which is, a distribution deal, or as the owner of that right, because I'm the record label and I signed you as the artist or have acquired that sound recording. again, we're talking about the recording of it, not the songwriting, right? And so from the recording perspective, what happens is that, they push it out to all the platforms. So suddenly you're going to see it on YouTube, on Spotify, on Apple Music, on Amazon, you name it, right? All those platforms. And what happens again at the DSP, the digital service provider, so the music service, is that every time they stream the song or sell a download, they know to pay Universal as a label, who will then pay you as a contracted artist, right? So that's the, in a very high level, the infrastructure. Creators who might be one and the same, they could be the songwriter and performer, but they could also be a songwriter separate from the performer. Those rights get registered, sent out via intermediaries of different types, could be distributors, labels, publishers, etc., who effectively go technically promote, that song, but also act as collection agents on your behalf, on my behalf as the creators. And that money comes back to us in the end after having run through a multitude of different exploitation. So the exploitation could be a simple sale of a vinyl or a stream, could be radio performance, could be in a commercial. Maybe somebody loves the song that we wrote and say, it should be in a new Marvel movie. And that also gets paid, right? So we have nowadays in our ecosystem, as you mentioned, a plethora of ways to monetize all those sound recordings and music publishing. The third aspect that I was mentioning in the ecosystem was the live performance, right? So anything that has to do with festivals, touring, concerts, etc. We don't really, I don't personally deal with it a lot, right? I mean, I'm familiar with it because I was a manager at one point for 5 minutes. I mean, I obviously, as a record label, you want to make sure your artists are touring. So you do, get involved in some aspect. You may have to provide also some, merchandise if you own those rights, etc. But at the end of the day, that business, which is huge, as you know, I mean, it's massive, right? Whether it's Glastonbury or Coachella or even just, I don't know, you name it, like, Dua Lipa, touring. I mean, those are big numbers, but they sort of live separately. They do use the rights. They have to pay the rights holders, but they don't necessarily need much from us, right? So they live in quasi-parallel. And that's the way I break it down at a high level. And you get a lot of functions that you mentioned. Who's a booking agent is obviously the intermediary between the artist and the promoters and the venues to say, okay, you're going to play Boston and New York, then Miami, and then you fly to Toronto, and doing that. Those are the booking agencies. The managers are really the CEOs of the artist business, right? So if I am, I don't know, Nickelback, or if I'm, any artist that you can think of, Metallica, I have my managers who help coordinate my entire business, right? Whether it's live, it's a merch, it's my personal affairs, it's pretty deep. They're very involved. And I really think of them as the CEO of the artist corporation and business in a lot of ways. And then obviously the rights holders, the rights owners, which I belong to, where we own sound recordings and music publishing. Now, in my instance, I also own another set of rights, which is called name, image, and likeness rights, which are really, think of it as the brand rights of the artist, which is where my business sort of differs from a lot of other, a lot of my quote unquote competitors. We do something a little bit extra. I'm sorry, that was a pretty long answer, but I hope that covered. It's not easy. I mean, it's there's a lot of parties involved, but at a high level, again, think of the rights first. So music publishing, record, and really performance, right? Live, performance and live appearances.
I could tell that there are a lot of legal advice involved, and those guys make a lot of money all this.
Yeah, our business is the music business is really, in a lot of ways, the role of the attorneys is outsized. They play a critical role because our business is entirely contract based, meaning that I can write, and whistle a song in my, shower in the morning. It has no value it starts having value, an important value, the minute that it starts getting exploited. And for that to happen, I need to somehow enter into a contract. And so the attorneys for me have three roles. They have a role of protection, ensuring that my rights are kept intact and not being infringed upon by anybody else. Two, the role of ensuring that the relationship, the commercial relationship that I establish with other parties are fair and well, in general, quite adequate in terms of compensation. And then the third aspect is actually really a consulting advisory aspect. Because of the amount of the volume that attorneys get to see from other transactions, licenses, etc., they tend to have a pretty good view of what is a fair market value for your rights, for their exploitation, for other platforms. Also having experience in terms of dealing with certain parties and say, look, I've had a really bad experience with that person or that publisher, you should really consider them. So their role is much closer to one of a manager sometimes than what you would consider an attorney in a different. For me, I look at my Rolodex. It's primarily, every day I talk to probably 6 to 10 attorneys on any given day, and a lot of them are my friends. Peter Paterno, who's a very famous music attorney, is somebody that I consider a friend. He's an exceptionally bright attorney and does a lot of work for us. And and when you talk to him, you realize very quickly that it's much more than just somebody telling you whether clause 8B in a contract should be amended. There's much more value to it than that. And again, there are plenty of attorneys in our business who are very, very bright and have experience way beyond just being what you would consider an attorney in other businesses.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about the artists and the revenue streams. How about that? So we wrote the music, we wrote the song, you and I, right? How are we going to monetize it?
Broadly speaking, you got to think of one, obviously, what you would consider record sales. Obviously, streaming nowadays is what drives our business, but that's really what is the most obvious source of income. Think of Spotify, Apple Music again, Deezer, in Europe or in South America. You've got a lot of different places where your music can live. Then you have what is called synchronization. So it's when you synchronize the audio recording with visuals. So when you see a music in a movie, I mentioned the Marvel movie earlier on, or a TV commercial, or a computer game, or a, you name it, right? Anything that has a third party brand, film studio, TV show, computer game, that's using that recording has to pay a license fee. And that usually is a flat fee. Can be quite high. In certain cases and certain commercials, you could get $2-3 million for big campaigns. Again, if you think of a Hollywood movie, you're going to get $50 to $500,000 for having your song placed in that movie. So you've got that, and that's really a direct licensing model, right? Between a publisher, a record label, and a third-party licensor who wants to use, that recording.
It's just one-time fee, right? It's not like any recurring.
Yes, but then you have income, and that's the third aspect. You have what would be considered statutory sources of income. So those are ones that are determined by law. And so if a song gets played on the radio or on Sirius XM, let's say, you get payments. And those payments are collected usually by a society, right? And the society would be BMI, you may have heard of them, ASCAP, SACEM in France, PRS in the UK, GEMA in Germany. I can go on as SEGAI in Spain. There's, tons of different places. They quasi-governmental bodies, and they have licensing deal in place with radio station, broadcasters, streaming services, and other places, and they effectively collect that money from those places on behalf of songwriters and sometimes performers.
Who gets paid more, the writer or the artist?
Usually, I mean, it depends a lot, right? So the artist, in a sense, because of the live component, dwarf any songwriter. I mean, the money that you make live when you're a successful artist is staggering. I mean, you could be coming home if you're Taylor Swift, 30, $40 million from a tour easily. So, you could not, it would take an extraordinary amount of record sales or radio play or streaming to be able to get that kind of income. It's a huge amount. Now, if you're a recording artist, record sales nowadays, because of streaming again, I mean, I keep referring to record sales as the broad category, but obviously it's driven by streaming. Streaming tends to be a pretty relatively fair split with the labels. It tends to be, fair. It tends to be an equal split, 50-50. Anybody can argue whether it's sufficient and the artist should get 75%, whatever. I don't want to get into that. But at the end of the day, the split is much more favorable than what it used to be in the old days, where you used to get paid 10, 15, sometimes 20% if you were a big artist, with a lot of deductions. Nowadays, $100 come in once again, 50 goes to the artist, 50 to the label. And so the money is pretty good. If you're a successful recording artist, you do make a lot of money. As a publisher, on new, and I insist on brand new recordings, you're not going to do as well as your Justin Bieber or your, whoever is the flavor of the moment, who's doing extremely well. You're not going to do as well. However, if you've built a significant catalog, right, you're Elton John or somebody like that, and your songs have been covered, think of the Beatles and Yesterday. That song must have been covered easily 3,000 times. And from Frank Sinatra to even, punk band making fun of it and covering it. I mean, I can go on and on. It's a lot of covers. Your income stream is very diversified and coming from people who may have more success than you. I mean, if you think of Bob Dylan, who obviously was a very successful artist in his own right, but some of the songs that he's had been, Jimi Hendrix, All Along the Watchtower, is definitely more popular than Dylan's own version. I mean, it's not even in the same, category. And so, that is money that goes to Bob Dylan, right? And I can go on and on with a lot of different artists who've had, there's a not very famous artist called Laura Nyro, right? It's Nyro. Sort of been forgotten now. But she was one of the top 10 most successful songwriter of the 60s, where her songs were covered by Blood, Sweat, and Tears and Barbara Streisand, and on and on and on and on, right? And she never made it as a recording artist. She was signed to Columbia. It was a little quirky. She had a pretty unique voice, and but was a gifted songwriter. And actually, David Geffen was her manager. That's how he really started. And so he was a booking agent, actually, believe it first, and then became the manager. But anyhow, so Laura Nyro, on the publishing side, made easily, 100 times more than she made as a recording artist. And that continues to pay today. So it's really not, there's no answer as in one over the other. It depends on your body of work as a songwriter, determines how much money you're going to be making, obviously, and how diversified it is. If you're a performer and a writer, so you write songs for yourself, like James Taylor or whatever, you probably make more money from your recordings, at least, while you're active and performing.
Got it. Maybe one more question there. You mentioned that when artists go on tour, they obviously make most of the money there, right? And the recording, the writer is not making as much.
No. The writers make money. So basically, if you play Madison Square Garden, you more or less, I'm just giving a rule of thumb, but 5% of the box office money gets paid to the songwriters, right?
Interesting. Wow.
I'm, it varies quite a bit, and it's complicated, and depending on how many artists are on there and the set list, and etc. But just in general, think of it where a percentage of the income is going to be paid to the songwriters, which is fair. If you think about it, that song is being performed. It's a public performance. That money will go to the collection societies that I was mentioning earlier on, PRS in the UK, BMI, ASCAP, CSAC in the US, etc.
When I go to YouTube, I have I can see 5 million cover versions of one song, right? Some of them are covered by well-known artists, as you said, right? Bob Dylan, and but others are just regular Joes. Do technically regular Joes also have to pay?
It gets monetized. Yeah. So YouTube, would share in the advertising income with the rights holders, assuming that it's been matched, right? Wow. So the way it works, it's called a UGC. So it's user-generated content, and the user-generated content has been a struggle for YouTube, but it's not easy. If you think about it, I mean, the amount of content that gets uploaded to YouTube every day is staggering.
Yes,
it's absolutely insane. It becomes a little difficult, for YouTube to monetize everything, but the intent is there and the technology is there to try to do that. Where if, again, Joshua, as you mentioned, does a cover of Yesterday by Lennon McCartney, Sony Music Publishing should be paid for it via YouTube through a matching process where they can say, okay, that is my content. You can either claim it as the rights owner, and you have companies like Orpheum and others who do that for a living, where they'll have an army of interns and employees who go scrub the internet and scrub YouTube on your behalf to go and claim that copyright, and also through algorithms and fuzzy matches, etc., and some technologies, not just a battery of interns in the basement. And then you get paid as the rights owner for it. So technically, yes, it should be monetized.
So I think you prepare us very well for the common discussion about Iconoclast, what you guys do. What's the story behind the company? How did you start it, and what led to it?
Well, a couple of things. I was a label executive and a publisher for a long time, and for me it was a mix of very personal decision where I just didn't want to be an aggregator of rights only, just a rights management company, and also a realization that a lot of the legacy artists were going, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, right? Were starting to be faced with questions around succession, for example. If you're in your 70s, what's going to happen to your rights? What's going to happen with even your name, image, likeness, your brand? And so I felt there was a real need for a company that would be focused on managing that transition, and also ensuring that there's a company and not just an individual that would be entrusted with perpetuating that legacy. Going back to your first question, the managers have been there for a long time, right? I mean, some of them have relationships, like John Lennon with Bruce Springsteen has been with him since the 70s, never changed. You have some of those relationships who are very, very long. Metallica's managers have been there from the beginning. Cliff Bernstein and Peter Mensch, and so people who have decade-long relationship with their clients and the artist, and but they're not set up necessarily to do that job, which is how do you think of future audiences, and how do you make that legacy palatable for a 12-year-old today, 10 years from now, 30 years from now? It's a different job in a lot of ways. You're not responsible for taking care of the artist affairs today. You're really in charge of trying to figure out what the future looks like. And I'm not saying that managers don't do that, but that's all we do. So we don't have any other distractions or concerns or priorities outside of thinking about that really was his generational translation job. That's the heart of what we do. And so for me, going back to your initial question, it came about multiple ways. One, as I said, was personal, wanting to do something a little bit different than just being a administrator or owner of music rights. Two was also thinking about the technology as a big influence in how we're going to be able to completely rethink the experience around legacy artists, both from a consumer standpoint and also from the rights owner standpoint. And I'll get back into that later. And then the other side was also very French, was taking a cue and inspiration from a lot of those incredible fashion houses that we have in France. Vuitton and Hermès and Dior and Chanel, etc. And it really was a question to me. It was I was in Paris and thinking, I was at Vuitton, the Vuitton store, and they were selling this big trunk. I don't know if you've even seen them. It's this huge trunk that you see in those movies, around the turn of the century, where you go on the big boat and the cruise liner, and you were carrying those big trunk cases, with your clothes and everything in there. And Vuitton had done this amazing thing where they had made a custom trunk, I think, for Gustave Mahler. Gustave Mahler, the classical composer. And it opened, big trunk, had a little table and a music stand. It was amazing. I'm watching this. It's so, you could totally imagine the classical composer going to, Venice and opening his big trunk with, maybe his tuxedo to perform and being able to write music right there with a little folding chair that came with it, with a leather strap on top where you could sit. I mean, amazing. And next to it, they had made a contemporary one for the sort of digital nomad DJ, right? Where you had the ability to put your iPad on there, etc. And for me, it was so revealing. I said, that's what they're doing. They're trying to keep that legacy, that thread, that artistic thread going today. And so you had the really turn of the century one, and you had the contemporary one, and they could coexist perfectly and reach different audiences. And so that was a big inspiration to me, thinking, how do those amazing fashion brands are able to still monetize in a lot of ways their designs, some of them dating back to the 19th century, and still maintaining that relevancy with consumers, with an audience in general. I mean, think of the Birkin bag, right? The Jane Birkin, bag that Hermès has. I mean, that's from the 60s, and yet it's still the most popular design. What are they doing that we're not doing? So, and then the other thing was really a bunch of conversations with various people. One of them being Stephen Stills from Crosby, Stills and Nash, where that question was sort of floating in his camp. How does the future look like? How do we get organized? He had a really smart business manager, and that was a very engaging, interesting conversation with him, not with him necessarily, but with him and his team around succession. He has his kids and his wife, and thriving copyrights, obviously. And so what do you do? So all in all, you put that in one messy bag, and that's where it sort of came out of.
So you come in and you buy that messy bag for X amount of money, and your goal is to maximize what the annual revenue, or what's your motivation?
I wouldn't use that term, to be honest, because it's not about maximizing. Like that for me is, and I'm not saying that in jest, or it's meant, right? It's not if I look at an artist, I'm not going to say what's the maximum amount I can extract out of it, because you've got to be very careful, right? Those brands they're not fragile, unlike fashion, right? Fashion, you can have bad press, you Steve Madden, you go to jail, your brand could go to zero. music will never go to zero. I mean, think of Michael Jackson, what happened to him, or any of those issues. I mean, it doesn't go away necessarily. Thus, the ability to intelligently and strategically think of how you're going to develop that brand is actually quite important. So, to answer your question, we do buy rights, buy the music rights, we buy the brand rights, and then becomes the exercise of figuring out how do you grow this, not maximize, really how do you grow it to a certain degree. But some of them, you could say, look, we're happy where it is today. We don't have to stress it. I mean, I don't want to go and pimp it out. That's never the intent. And I think, well, you got to remember is that if I'm Coca-Cola, I'm selling the same stupid ass bottle, 200 million times a year. I only have one Tony Bennett or one Marianne Faithfull or one Giorgio Moroder. There's only one of that person. So I got to be very careful. I mean, we bought, a very prestigious band called The Band, right? It's not the easiest name in the age of the internet, but, probably one of the most accomplished and gifted group of musicians ever put together, iconic in the 60s. And, they're still relevant today. But my goal here is not necessarily to say, okay, I can make $300,000, dollar more annually. It is part of that, but that's the end result. The real exercise is how do I make that music, and again, connecting generational dots. How do I make that music, that iconic song, The Wait from 1968, 69, 68, 69, how do I make that song something that's going to resonate with somebody who's maybe listening to, again, go back to Dua Lipa or Taylor Swift today? I don't think it's a gigantic gap because good music is good music, and I'm dealing really every day what I consider rarefied air. I come from Bordeaux, the wine region in France. So a lot of my friends from childhood went into the wine business, and I always thought it was the stupidest business on earth. Who doesn't want to try a bottle of wine? Well, I'm in the same stupid business. I don't have to convince them that it is great music. It is great music. It's been proven to be great music. I just have to make them aware. Just like somebody's popping that bottle of wine and say, try this. And once you have that, it's relatively easy. The question is really more a marketing challenge for me, which is why, I sort of rethought what I thought should be the modern music company, in a sense that you're trying to fight a incredible amount of noise every day. You and I, with what we're doing right now, are going to be part of that noise. That's what's going to happen. And so in really what is a scarce or complex attention economy, how do you get somebody to want to care, to even want to take the time to say, okay, I'm going to click on that link, I'm going to click on this album, I'm going to click on that video, I'm going to want to use my most valuable currency, which is time, and invest it into what you're telling me I should be doing, I should be listening to, I should be watching, etc. That's the business I'm in.
When you decide to buy something, how do you value this catalog or this rights? Like, how do you quantify whether you pay X or Y?
I mean, the music market is very mature now. It's been mature for a long, long time. I mean, rights have been bought and sold ever since I first started in the music business. So it's nothing new. I think the only difference is now done at scale, right? A lot of private equity funds, pension funds have now invested in the area. I mean, I'm part of it, and meaning my backer. So that's the only major difference, is really the scale of investment as opposed to what it used to be. As far as the methodology is concerned, there's really nothing, I would say, dramatically new that has happened. It's still very a mix of artistic choices and decisions around financial and consumption data. The big difference from, I would say, 10 years ago, more or less, is that we now have data that financial sponsors, financial institutions are able to understand. it's much more palatable. That is really what has changed. So the methodology for calculating what you should be purchasing a right for is not too dissimilar, I would say, from other industries nowadays. The sources of income are complicated. To get your head around what is, again, when you ask me about the ecosystem, you see how much of a crappy answer I gave you, because it's extremely complicated. That's what we're taking into consideration in our valuation. So to answer your question directly, it's going to be really looking at past income, projecting this out, and doing a standard discounted cash flow kind of analysis, not too dissimilar to what KKR would do for buying a steel factory, from Mittal in India, something like that. I mean, it's not that dissimilar. The other aspect is obviously and it's no different than other businesses. Again, I don't think what we do is so special. I think a lot of us think it is, but it is specialized, but it is not special. Also is really having a vision for what you're buying. I mean, for me, again, because I don't consider myself a pure aggregator of rights, the answering the why I'm buying something is pretty damn important. And I don't mean that in a pompous, artistic way only. It's also really a strategic consideration. So why am I buying this? What am I going to do with it? Is it to sit on the shelf, or do I have an idea as to what should be happening? Is there a gap? Is there an arbitrage, to talk in finance term? But that arbitrage is not necessarily just financial. Could be, it is financial in the end, but it could be simply looking at, a certain artist, say, okay, they've not really engaged their audience. They have the implied audience is way smaller than the realized, the actual audience. Look at social media. Why would a band that sold $100 million records have only maybe 2 million fans? Where's the disconnect? So those kinds of questions, and also because we will managers having a clear view. I don't want to use vision because it sounds very pompous, but at the end of the day, having a clear view as to what you're going to do with a certain legacy is critical. Why did I buy the band? Why did I want to buy Tony Bennett? Why do I want to buy, X, Y, and Z? Again, I'm not going to go through, the entire roster, but, why did we buy the Matt Distant catalog from DJ Diplo? I mean, again, the choices. There's tons of assets, not because we're able to price it right. That's part of the answer, where the price is satisfactory to the seller. But I don't have to do this transaction. I could look at others. So the genre, the vintage, the era, the notoriety, the current presence, the activity. I mean, all those things which are a bit more qualitative and obviously infused with quantitative and data in general. That blend is what leads to the decision. But for me, the first answer, and I mean that again genuinely, is a why. I got to answer that for myself. Why am I deciding to spend what is really a lot of money nowadays for those rights? If I can't answer that, there's a pretty good chance I'm not going to do the deal.
There is a lot of technological changes, right? I think you were just in VR and AR, etc. When you let's get back to, let's say, discounted cash flow. Like, you have to kind of predict what's going to be revenue from this catalog down the road. When you think of this technological change, is it upside for you? Is it like cherry on top, or you take it into consideration when you come up with the purchase price?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question, because it's something we, I don't want to say struggle, but we certainly think about all the time. It's really hard today for me to ascribe or credit any kind of value towards future technology. Intuitively, you should say yes, right? And I do. Right? When I think of it, and I say, well, yeah, I mean, my artists are going to be performing in the metaverse, right? Or, a blockchain should be allowing me to do direct-to-consumer digital collectibles, right? I mean, anything that's Web3 related, etc. So all of that should be a factor. But the problem is that today, and even if you look at the roadmap over the next year and a half to 2 years, we've been talking about it forever. I mean, I actually on my desktop I got a new computer over the Christmas period, and I was cleaning files and I found my first business plan from 2015. It's quite a while back, right? 8 years ago, literally called Iconoclast, same logo, same everything, when I first tried to pitch this to investors. And I have a whole section around technology. Metaverse is, a blockchain technology and blah, blah, same thing. And yet very little has panned out in a way where it's palatable and at scale, where it makes a difference. Right. So if you think of those, let's use Metaverse, probably the most easiest example to use. Am I seeing a lot of very successful performances in the Metaverse? No. Where does that leave? Is there a Madison Square Garden in the Metaverse? No, there isn't. I mean, I can go on and on. We don't have a great adoption from consumers who want to experience virtually what we currently do on a day-to-day basis. So really, if you break it down, you've got a few issues. One is to use again VR specifically, not a huge adoption of headsets. I mean, even the Quest ones, numbers are not, staggering. Most of the audience that decides to buy them, they're buying those because they're gamers. I mean, you can look at the data. It's there for everybody to see. So they're not going for an entertainment experience. I mean, even the Google, what is it? They have this cinema, screen that you can look through Quest and on YouTube, sorry, not Google. And the numbers are not great. And you would think that screen, I have a Quest at home. When you look at it with it, you're looking at an IMAX, basically. That's the experience that you're replicating. So you should think that it's better, yet it's not. And so again, the adoption of the technology is slow. The platforms that cater to consumers are not really there today. And the experience in the end is still a little clunky. Now, to answer your question, am I factoring this in? In some aspect, yes. I think there are certain things that are there today. I know the NFTs turn into a fucking pile of crap in the end, right? But I am a big defender. I think there's real value in having a digital collectible. At the most simplistic level, this will become something that will be part of every bundle that you're going to get. If you buy the t-shirt from Marine Layer or whoever is a hot brand of the moment, with your, your Joe Walsh, t-shirt and, from his 1975 tour, and that's, you're buying the physical object, you should be able to buy the digital collectible that comes with it for your avatar, platform independent, right? Whether you want to wear it in Fortnite or in your VR Meta with your Quest glasses, wherever it is. So we'll see more and more interesting bundles like that. If you're buying the box set for The Last Waltz from the band, right, the very famous concert, which we own, it's from '76, you should be able to get the behind the scene documentary unlocked with it. And that should be something that is tied indelibly to your purchase, your physical purchase. That's the beauty of the blockchain, right? Suddenly you can literally create that unique link, not even to do with any smart contract, just a ledger, and have a record that it is there and it can be tradable. Maybe you can even make money out of it. There's going to be some interesting development there where the audience in general and the consumers are going to be having the ability to themselves have something of value in their hand beyond the experience of listening to that amazing content. And that I'm a big believer in. What form it takes, when it's going to happen, unfortunately, which is a way more important question, I don't know. I don't know, Asnor.
How do you separate your emotions and your admiration for the artist from the purchasing price? So,
Through practice. And I've done a lot of deals, absolutely driven by complete passion. And over the years, I've really measured myself much better than I used to be honest. And so I still, again, the why that we were talking about is still the driver, and that driver is very emotional in a sense. And I got to qualify what that means. Not just thinking I love it, it's
yeah.
also I love it and I can see a path, right? It comes together, and the path is what we're going to do with this. Like that's what when we're talking about the perspective and the vision around how you're going to develop X artist legacy, etc. That's really what drives the decision. So there is an emotional component, but it's not emotional in the sense of out of control. It's really a reaction to something that you love so much and know so well that somehow it becomes self-explanatory as to why you should be in business with this artist. When I was on the what we call the front line, the new artist, right?
Mhm.
This is where it gets out of control because it becomes a bit like a love story. You fall in love with an artist that nobody has necessarily heard about and nobody necessarily cares about, and it's very easy to get carried away. You think I just found Led Zeppelin. Literally that's how it goes. So I think it's much harder on the new artist than it is on the legacy artist. I mean, again, there are some where I'm going to push it because I do believe that
Mhm.
it's much more belief than emotions. I absolutely believe that X artist is going to translate with future generations, and we know how we're going to do it, and so it's much more of a rational decision that you think it would be. On the new artist, I mean, if I told you how much money I've spent, even my own money, on stuff that went nowhere, it's shocking. But that's why you do it.
In a sense, it's like a venture capital versus like invest in blue chips that already proved themselves, right?
Very similar. Yeah, very true. The new artists are your VC market, where for every 10 you're going to get one that pops. And literally, I mean, it's so difficult. I mean, for me, I was an A&R, which is the artist and repertoire where you go find the artist. I did that for many years, running labels and running, music publishing companies, and you become really so sure of yourself. You say, I know this is going to do well, and it doesn't happen, and yet you never question it. You just go on to the next one, not in a dismissive way. You say, you know what, screw this artist. You say, it's okay, I'll still continue. And I've become a bit more cynical about that part, where it's extremely difficult. And so for every A&R that found a massive artist that blew up, right, an Adele or something like that, I guarantee you they've signed 15 other artists that you've never heard of and went nowhere. And so that's really your VC business. For every Uber, you've got your fetch.com that's going to go to zero. And then and so for what I do is much more it's, by the way, it's backed by private equity. There's a certain predictability of the income. There's a certain baseline where it's never going to go to zero. So you have a level of security that comes with it. That's obviously, I would say, an easier business than trying to find a new talent. Obviously, where it becomes much more complicated is how is this going to do over a 10-year period or 20-year period or 30-year period? You're talking massive trend lines. I mean, that's something I think about all the time. I'll give you a perfect example. If you look at the valuations in my business, 60s and a little bit 70s artists are getting incredible prices. I mean, they dwarf any other generation.
Like,
And
give me an example. Like in
80s,
multiples.
in multiples, you'll get 25, 30 times annual earnings. You don't see that in many businesses, if any, for that matter. And so if you think of Bob Dylan, Paul Simon, Sting, Bruce Springsteen, I mean, go on and on and on. All of those have hovered around 30 times annual earnings. And it's, for me, it became a really interesting question. I said, well, it is insanely expensive in some aspect. Is it justified? And I always actually use the example, if I could resurrect my grandmother and I asked her, who would you buy if you were in my shoes? She'd probably tell you Glenn Miller. Where's Glenn Miller today? Where is it? Tommy Dorsey, those incredibly popular big bands. And so for me, the question is always, and it's a very complicated question, is Bob Dylan going to become Tommy Dorsey or Glenn Miller? Is that 60s music really something that's going to be eternal? Because we grew up, at least I grew up on that music, am I biased? Where I think that it's the greatest thing ever, and I'm dismissive of, I'm not obviously, but I'm going to consider that other music from the 90s, let's say, less valuable. And you look at the 90s, how long ago was that? It's a long time ago. So we have decades to tell us whether it is in the same strata and performing the same way. So, and some of it is. So when you asked about the question on the emotional, and how do you contain yourself or constrain yourself and control that, here's your answer. Me, I tried to check myself and say, okay, why am I doing this deal? Is also answering that question. Am I really sure that Neil Young, whom I absolutely worship, or the band, one of my all-time favorite, is going to be there forever? And part of my business is answering that question. What can I do as the owner and manager of the brand to make sure that I fight that decline that we're not seeing today, but I have to believe will be coming? There will be a generational shift. My parents' generation are in their mid to late 70s. They're the ones who grew up, who bought the record at the time. They're going to go away, unfortunately. What's going to happen? How is my daughter's generation going to react to Bob Dylan's music? Right? And we don't really know, but you got to make broad assumptions around that. I believe so. And I don't know if, I think it's not happening in my business personally.
Do you think the reason why the 60s and 70s are so expensive is because the people who have these funds, who invest in this business, who buys these catalogs, are people who grew up in that era, and they actually have this incredible bias? Or
I think it's a couple of things. I think there's definitely a cultural bias, if you want to call it that. But I also think that the era is, in a sense, and I'm going to sort of counter my own argument, but at the time was totally unique. There is no other period in recent modern history, and I'll go from the start of the century, and even beyond, in a sense, where music became the language of the cultural dialogue. If you think of it, that's the art form that captured all the sort of key demographic social changes of the baby boomers. That was the language of the cultural language of the baby boomers. And it's a combination of things, right? And this is where I think the bias can come in also from historical circumstances. You've got several factors. A demographic boom, obviously the baby boomers, right? I mean, that it's in the name. You've got recording technology, which wasn't there really before, right? A lot of recording technology that we got in the 60s actually were developments during World War II. Compressors, right, which maintain levels, were used on submarine to amplify sonar. Not the sonar, but the actual listening that they were doing in submarines, in U-boats and others, so that they could listen whether they could recognize a propeller, etc. So you've got a lot of that coming. You also have mass media coming at the same time. I mean, think of it. Today, we're in the most fragmented media landscape ever, literally. Right? Unless you go back to 19th century and you could only listen to your local, you can only read your local newspaper, right?
Yeah.
Because you didn't have national newspapers. But so think of that generation post World War II. Suddenly, I Love Lucy or the Ed Sullivan Show are clocking half of the TV audience on a single program. Today, if you're the Johnny Carson of today, I don't even know who they are, on CBS, NBC, etc. You're at best having 2 million people watching you. The Beatles, when they perform on the Ed Sullivan Show, had half of the nation in front of the screen looking at them. So the focal attention that you got during that generation meant that there was one cultural sort of language being spoken. Today, you could be in heavy metal from Poland and blah, blah, and live on your Facebook group and be totally oblivious to Taylor Swift. In those days, you could have never escaped it, right? And I'm not saying that it was a force feeding necessarily or a top-down phenomenon, but the classic, the media is a medium, right? I mean, it's literally that. It's the media platform where unifying everybody under one sort of cultural banner, if you wish. So those artists from that generation had a complete strategic advantage, if you wish, by coming during that time, where if you made it, Rolling Stone magazine, a few radio stations, late night TV, all that got together and aligned itself in a perfect way to ensure that your fame was, I don't want to say guaranteed. I mean, they had extraordinary talent, but it all coalesced at the same time. Demographic changes, technological changes, media changes, and it all clicked. And I have to believe that it was a unique moment in time. And the question is, was it such a big bang that is going to resonate for another million years? Your guess is as good as mine.
Yeah, well, probably your guess is better than mine. I know nothing about
I don't know,
music.
actually. I don't know. I got to be honest. And I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm clueless, but I'd rather question it than take it for granted. That's my perspective.
In short-term perspective, interest rates went up. Does it affect anything in valuation in your world or not really?
No, absolutely not.
Okay. I don't know.
It does. It was a big impact
really?
for all of us. I mean, my financial backer is a company called PIMCO.
Oh yeah, I know.
Very large financial institution, and they're actually fantastic. I mean, we're getting. Look, it's my third financial sponsor now, and they're by far the best partner I've had, in a sense of having a good balance between understanding the assets, and I don't mean from a technical standpoint, but even what it is that we're dealing with, which is not a bunch of widgets. It's a bit more complicated. But the other benefit that we're getting is incredible amount of information around the financial ecosystem at large, and being able to be pretty reactive to what's going on. And so we're we have the benefit of getting a lot of guidance around it. So we didn't get caught by surprise in some ways, but at the same time, it's just reality. I mean, anybody, especially for assets in music where you can leverage, 50 to 80% of the purchase price. It's unique. Again, absolutely unique. And I mean, I don't want to say it's unique. There's real estate and other things you can leverage at the same level, but for something that is has the capacity to, well, let me backtrack. You got to think of music as a bond with the upside benefit of a stock.
I wanted to say, like, PIMCO it's a fixed income company, so clearly they treat it
way
as
more than that. They do way more nowadays. Yeah.
Interesting.
So I had the same perspective because we all know, the classic PIMCO period and the Bill Gross and the Bond King, etc. But nowadays it's pretty very diversified company. I mean, they have private equity investment, they do real estate, they do all sorts of things. But lending, obviously, is still lending, and bond is still obviously a big portion of the business. And so being able to have the ability to get all that intelligence, as part of what we do, I don't come from finance. So for me, it's I'm not saying it's new because I've been doing it now. I've learned it on the job, if you wish. But I don't spend my days wondering whether directionally interest rates are going to go this way or this way. And I don't think I should, to be very honest. I mean, I have to be cognizant, I have to be intelligent about it, but I'm not going to do the research. That's not my skill set. And so to answer your question, it has had an impact. I don't think it's been totally factored in by everybody. I still see deals which it's totally a judgment. I feel are completely overvalued, especially not just intrinsically, but also based on the financial markets having shifted. I mean, it's, when you leverage at 50 to 80%, you cannot be blind to it, that's for sure.
Murder Inc. You bought the catalog, and clearly it's not where you grew up listening, right? Why Murder Inc?
I didn't grow up in Queens, New York. That's for sure.
But what's about them that you were so interested in? Why did you think that you know enough about this music, you know enough about the culture, and you know enough that this music going to be around, that you're willing to pay quite a bit for?
Well, there are several factors. I mean, one was, I wanted to be in business with Irv Gotti. In general, I think he's an extraordinary entrepreneur. Somebody who grew up in Queens, in a pretty tough area, and he's now directing movies and built an amazing label. I mean, he's an amazing person. So that was one aspect, and I'm not going to rank them, but in general. Two, I do believe that 90s R&B and hip hop is sort of the classic rock era of hip hop. And that's personal judgment on that, but you can see that music's not going away. It's still very much consumed. And I think it's, again, thinking about generationally, I think that's the classic rock era of people of hip hop. Right? I mean, you could say that Run DMC and those guys, but I actually look at them more as Chuck Berry and Little Richard and the early 50s rock and roll. They were the pioneers who, Public Enemy and all those, they came in and they burst the door open, and just like, Chuck Berry and Little Richard and those guys did for Elvis and others, and so that was that. And then the other aspect is, if you look at this music, and it's sort of the same point about the relevancy, a lot of contemporary hip hop artists are starting to look in the rearview mirror and say, that's what I grew up on. That's what I was inspired on, and sampling hip hop. So they're sampling that music. For me, I thought it was fascinating. I said, okay, well, just like, Freddie Mercury and Queen are going to be sampled by, Under Pressure, right? Was sampled, by Vanilla Ice and, and others. You're seeing the same thing happening within the hip hop genre, where current artists are looking back at this music and starting to say, okay, well, that's my history. That's what I listen to. Just like when I was a kid, I would listen to anything from Yes to the Beatles to whatever it is, right? It's the same. So those were the main drivers.
What can you say about Irv Gotti? You think you said that he's an extraordinary entrepreneur. What makes him so?
He has several qualities. One, absolutely fearless. And I don't mean that in a way where, he, is blind to reality, etc. It's just a incredible belief in his own ideas. Right? If he thinks of a creative idea, he's gonna go make it. And I can talk to him and go to lunch with him, etc. But if it's implanted in his head, he's gonna go get it done. And that ability to literally go and not even remove, he ignores obstacles. It's quite phenomenal. And it doesn't mean that he's not analytical and not aware of what's going on. It's irrelevant to him, which, I can't say the same. I mean, I'm an entrepreneur. I mean, in a lot of ways. I mean, I started my own business, etc. But I'm not wired this way. So there's that. Two, he has an amazing personality. When you meet with him, he's very funny, very friendly, very compelling, can be very hard sometimes. But at the end of the day, that when you're one-on-one with him, he's so compelling that you want to jump on that train with him. You think, you know what, this is never going to stop. I might as well just be, latch on and go on for the ride with him. And then the third aspect is he's got a fertile creative mind. He's obviously proven it in music, but when you start talking to him about computer games or anything that's entertainment related, he has a broad knowledge of what's going on, and he's able to say, okay, that idea will resonate well with this and this, and the ability to connect cultural dots, especially in hip hop, that is unique. And that's not coming from just a lot of chatter, etc. It's really coming from him. People don't realize, and I encourage you to watch the documentary called The Murdering Story on people don't realize how deeply ingrained he has been in hip hop, dating back to the 80s when he was DJing in the parks in Queens. And so his knowledge base and his intuitive feel for the genre, the culture at large, right, is, for me, absolutely unique. And there are not a lot like him. Like Jay-Z is another one. I mean, he's literally that level where they understand, that culture going all the way back to the beginning and being able to see the trend line and what drove it and what inspiration came. I mean, you talk to Irv, and if you tell me, I love that track, and you pick the most fucking obscure track you can think of, right, in hip hop, and he'll tell you who recorded it, whether there was a sample, what album, when it came out. I mean, same, by the way, I can do in rock and roll. I have the most unbelievably deep knowledge of idiotic facts about rock and roll and classic rock. And so I can tell you what console, what microphone was used. I mean, blah, blah, blah. He has that in hip hop, but so much more, because he uses that as a foundation to pick ideas and generate new things out of it. Enough praising my friend Irv.
Let's talk about your knowledge of rock and roll. So I was watching you being on the panel with finance guys talking about financing IP rights, and I'm like, I work with private equity funds day to day, and I know how they talk. I'm like, okay,
right.
this is the guy who sounds like he's a typical business guy, right? And
right.
I have my own perception of you. Then I find another interview of you talking with two guys. I think they run a studio or something, recording studio.
I remember that interview.
And you guys geeking out about equipment, about music production, about the sound of Led Zeppelin. I'm like, Jesus, he's like covers this whole spectrum of being this typical business guy who is like portrayed in a main street as evil, to this incredibly knowledgeable guy who actually plays bass and knows everything from the bottom up. How is this spectrum? Is it helping you in a day-to-day basis, or it's like, everybody does this?
But no, because it's not whether they coexist. It's just an arc. For me, it all starts with the music. And I know it sounds cliche, but I'm going to go way back in time. When I was probably around 8 or 9, I became really intrigued with how those records that I absolutely loved were made. And so for me, my entire career in music is really, in a sense, that it's chasing and trying to understand where does that spark come from. And you'll never get to it, which is what, in a sense, makes it frustrating and magical, is that you cannot explain, how John Lennon came up, with A Day in the Life, and how did they use that orchestra on there, etc. But you can try to break it down as much as you can. And so for me, it's one big path. Is first thinking, how those records are made, to suddenly thinking, well, I want to be part of that experience, being a musician. I want to play that. I want to understand that bass line on something that McCartney, it's one of great bass line. And so how do you come up with that? Well, let me transcribe it and play it, and then you become and say, well, I want to be with the guys in the studio. Then going on the other side of the glass and say, okay, well, now I have a record, what do I do with it? Right. So I think it's just an iteration where now I'm in a place where I'm dealing with the music that, again, I'm looking in the rearview mirror, the music that I loved, worshipped, of different eras, and have very, as you can tell, varied taste. And so having that skill set of understanding investment came as a necessity to be able to do that, as opposed to being a passion. I didn't wake up one day and say, shit, I'm going to read the Wall Street Journal every day, and I'm going to learn about discounted cash flow and IRR, etc. It's a necessity of what I do every day. But at the end of the day, I would certainly say that that skill set is easily replaceable, as opposed to having accumulated 30, 40 years of wanting to literally break down every record that I've ever listened to, from Herbie Hancock to Led Zepp to whatever it is. That's more valuable to me on a day-to-day basis, because that gives me the broad context of what is it that I'm listening to, and that also inspires me every day to start connecting dots with biopics and documentaries and coffee table books, etc., because I have that in me. I have that in me, knowing that I can go pretty granular into understanding what happened with that artist and what genre and what was happening in culture around them. Not just that. I love movies, photography, all those things. It all ends up informing each other. If I think, and technology, we're talking about it, right? I mean, recording technology had a direct impact on the music that you and I listen to. If you don't have compressors, you have to be like Sinatra, where you constantly monitor the distance to your microphone. You can't do closed mic. You cannot do hard rock. You cannot record an electric guitar without a compressor. Not at full volume, distorted. So it all works together. And for me, that's the valuable part. But to answer your initial question, it's an arc. Suddenly I'm being told, well, not being told, but in 2008, I did my first acquisition, and I got to freaking value it now. I got to figure out how it's going to work. So I hired a bunch of accountants in the UK to help me, etc. I'm not an expert. I did go to Colombia. I did, to be very honest, I didn't work that much. So I didn't know how to do a model before, but I knew enough about the music to be able to figure out, if I'm buying this label, there was a good damn reason why I bought it. It was Greensleeves Records and Publishing at the time, a reggae label in the UK, very prestigious. And so again, the why and the cultural context of what this label meant in reggae music, when it happened, when it started, what it meant, what kind of music it picked up, was way more important than me trying to, figure out that 1 + 1 = 2. We got there eventually. It was not easy. It was painful, to be honest, to figure out how you value those things. I had zero experience in it, but I picked it up. And suddenly I'm saying, well, you know what? I can work with the rights that I love by buying them. I don't have to be a renter again. I don't have to be a manager. I can do something else. I didn't invent it. People had done it for decades before me, buying those rights. But for me, just on my little level, that became another tool set that I'm adding to this, right? So I'm fluent in it now because I have to. I'm not complaining, and it's not a complaint, but it's not what drives my. It's not what's in my mind every day. To your point about the interest rates, so it had an impact. Do I wake up and think about it every day? No, I don't. People way smarter than I at PIMCO who do that every day, and same with KKR and Blackstone, etc. That's what they're focused on, as they should.
Yeah, and they still be wrong, as everybody was. Let's try to understand Olivier as you are today, but like what led you to here, okay? You were born in Bordeaux, you said, right? In
Yes.
70s, I believe,
Yeah.
right? How do you remember that place?
Well, I actually didn't grow up in Bordeaux in the town itself. I actually grew up outside in the countryside. So I first grew up I was born in Talence, which is a university. You know, my dad was a doctor going to interning at a clinic, and my mom was a French teacher at the time, and was at least studying to become a French teacher. So we were in a university town, really, in Talence. And then we moved to Carignan, Bordeaux. It's minuscule. It's in the countryside outside of Bordeaux. So now it's much more residential, but at the time, you know, you still had farmers, etc. So it's you end up very isolated in some aspect, right? I mean, you don't have bus services that you can take when you're, 12. You're not going to get on the bus on your own. So you sort of depend on your parents. So, and I was the firstborn. I have two brothers. So most of my childhood was alone with my mom mainly. My dad was working a lot, but a lot of time with my mom. And my mom was, is very, very refined in a lot of ways. I mean, she's the one who bring records and, go to galleries and, etc. And in France, it's very portable, very easy to get access to culture. And there's a Ministry of Culture, etc. I mean, things that you don't have in this country. And so, so the childhood in a sense was, very much reading and, listening to records. And that's and I assume most kids, who live outside of a big city would be doing. And then the big, I would say the big shift is, I tell you what, read the Beatles. Beatles and Pink Floyd, those two bands, really bizarrely started a desire to try to understand like how those records are made. And one of the great things with the Beatles is that a lot of the records, especially the early records, when you listen, they pound hard right, hard left. So what that means is that you have drum and let's say bass on the right, and then the guitar, piano on the left, and the vocals in the center. So you're able to suddenly take out one of the speakers and say, okay, I just want to hear that. Or even bridge it, where you can take the chord and bring it into both speakers from one channel. And you start thinking, okay, how did they do that effect? And how did they do, like those vocals on Tomorrow Never Knows? Right? You listen to that record, it's a closing record on Revolver. You have all these loops, which we know what they are now because you have the internet and you can look it up, etc. But go back in time. You go back to the let's say early 80s, and you're trying to understand this. You have no resources. There are no books about it that you can really look up. There are no, interviews or anything like that. I mean, you may catch an interview on radio. Where are you going to get this? So but it becomes this total obsession. I mean, absolute obsession. And Wish You Were Here by Pink Floyd, that album, was another one. I mean, I got totally obsessed. And what happened is, I don't remember when, but I went to a secondhand bookstore in Bordeaux. It's called the Chapitre, which is a play on the word between the stupid cat and chapter. It's a French play on the word. And that place was secondhand albums, very messy, very much like you would imagine a secondhand mysterious bookstore, in an old part of town in a movie, right? Literally, you open the door, it creaks, and there's fucking shit everywhere and books, and it's messy. But I used to pick up really interesting things there, and two things that I can remember vividly. One was picking up a best-of of a Brazilian artist called Chico Buarque, who's one of the most famous artists in Brazil, and that had a huge impact musically on me. I mean, gifted musicians in Brazil, and I started a lifelong passion for Brazilian music. And then the other thing was picking up the songbook for Wish You Were Here. And that songbook had an introduction, it was in English, I had an introduction, an interview with all the band members in Pink Floyd explaining how they recorded the album and the challenge of recording synthesizers, what it's called direct injection into a console, where they had a loss of signal. I still remember the interview and all those things, and how Gilmore, ended up doing recording, overdubbing his guitars at Abbey Road, and the Neve console that they used, etc. I'm saying, okay, the veil is starting to lift here. I can start seeing what's happening, and so from there on, it was over. I mean, literally, the battle was over. And so I would pick up anything I could. I mean, Bordeaux was big enough where there was a small English language bookstore where I ended up buying, biographies of John Lennon and this, and the book on the Who, and something about I remember I had this book about the Bee Gees. And so you start wanting to, go behind the scene. But, thinking of it as a job was never a possibility. It felt so far, so far. And so the second best solution was for me to try to get to the UK. I mean, that became like the goal. It's not Paris. It's not even on the radar.
Let me interrupt you there for a second. Did you speak English already? Because you see the books were in English.
I went in summer camp in Scotland, 2 or 3 years in a row. And so my English was decent.
Gotcha.
It was not great, and reading especially was insanely painful. I would do it with we had
Dictionary.
Harper's Dictionary
Jesus.
at the time. It was a very famous French. I mean, there's actually a funny story. I remember reading there was the Goldman biography of John Lennon. Sorry, it came out. It was massive. I mean, massive book, right? I didn't know at the time. It's very controversial book. There's a lot of shit that was made up in it, etc. So it's definitely not, but at the time was a very successful biography, quite scandalous, etc. So I picked it up in English and I literally read it with a dictionary, and I was so eager, and it came out in French 2 months later. I read it in English. So
what a waste your life.
Damn it. But that, and then, even the lyrics were mysterious. I mean, at least, the Beatles best of the red and blue double LPs had the lyrics there, which is great, but a lot of albums didn't. And so, just trying to understand this thing was just maddening. I mean, still today, I still remember stuff that I misunderstood. I mean, the most famous, everybody thinks like Jimi Hendrix, let me kiss that guy, as opposed to kiss the sky or stuff like that, but there were so many of those. But more importantly, it was really understanding, photos. Like if you look at the album, The Gatefolds, I mean, if you look at Derek and the Dominos, right, that famous Clapton album, with Layla on it, you could open it up, and inside you had all these minuscule photos of, the band, and the studio, and it was recorded at Criterion in Miami. So you can start seeing, just like you're looking at, oh yeah, I can see a little bit of the console here, and I can see Duane Allman there, and who the hell is that guy, and, etc. But you have on that booklet, it doesn't tell you who's who. So again, and that's where, for me, the credits, we don't emphasize enough the importance of credits. You build an entire relational database in your head from the credits. So if I see that Duane Allman is on this album, I'm going to go to the record store and I'm going to say, okay, who the hell is Duane Allman? Oh, he's part of the Allman Brothers. Well, the Allman Brothers are related to Southern Rock. So maybe it will get me to Lynyrd Skynyrd. And from Lynyrd Skynyrd, they were produced by Al Cooper, is going to get me to Blood, Sweat, and Tears. And Blood, Sweat, and Tears had a Laura Nyro song on the album, If I Die. So maybe I'll check her out. So you start building a whole universe that way. That's your internet at the time. That's the only way to do it. You get into the band because you read somewhere that George Harrison was obsessed with music from Big Pink, that first album. So that's your link to the band. But then you learn that they were the backup band for Bob Dylan. All right, I'm going to pick up a Dylan record. So that's how you build that.
Is it how you found out about the band? Because I think Beatles liked them a lot, right?
Yeah, that or Bob Dylan, one or the other. So, but probably the Beatles, I'm pretty certain. But you could read anything about George Harrison. I mean, that was literally for him, as he said very famously, the best band in the universe.
Yep.
George Harrison. So here you go.
Yeah.
But so yeah, so it's all these points of connections, and then the next phase, is really trying to do it, whether it's play, record, etc. You want to understand, and that's like the ultimate rabbit hole, especially recording.
Yeah, and I'm sorry I interrupt
Isn't
you. You're trying to get to UK, right? As you're saying, like that.
Yeah, I mean that's when you grow up in France,
Yeah.
that's the music you listen to. That's the main influence. Those records are coming pretty quickly, and it's not American music. You don't grow up on blues, or I mean some people do, but for me it's not really. But you do, in a sense, grow up on blues via the British rock scene, whether it's Faces or Led Zepp or the departed Jeff Beck. All of those, that's what, Clapton and Cream, they were obsessed with the blues. So it doesn't necessarily come to you direct, but indirectly you pick it up. But the music you grew up in is really, if you're in France, it's obviously British music. That absolutely drives everything.
If I knew you at high school, how would I describe you?
I don't know. I didn't have a lot of friends. Not a huge amount. No, it's no.
Because you're too good, or because they? Why is that?
I just don't have. That was not my main focus in life. Was not really friendship. And going out and playing. I mean, I was nice. I would go to birthday party, etc. I was not lonely, but I did spend a huge amount of time on my own. And really a lot of reading, a lot of just very curious in general, and really that feeling that I'm sure a lot of us have, that there's something else, something bigger, that I'm not ambitious, that I'm not mandated by God to do anything, but I had a very early feeling that art in general is pretty damn important, and I was going to do something in the arts, whether it's looking at Henri Cartier-Bresson and photography, or reading Malraux and some French writers, Mallarmé or Faulkner or this, or that for me, and I don't mind this to come as pompous, but was really important. I felt that they were doing something was way more important than working at a job or having, anything. Not judgmental. You need a great baker. There's no question, right? And it's a noble profession, etc. But it felt to me that anybody that was working in the arts, whether it's a Pierre Soulages in painting, or Magritte or Francis Bacon, they're doing something so much more important that I should be somehow involved in that, right? And so it's a general feeling. It's not really, but it drove a lot of, my childhood, in the sense that everything else sometimes felt like a waste of time, which is not a great thing for social relations, to be honest. But now I look back and I'm thinking, okay, well, I'm feeling glad that I could have probably made more friends, but at the same time, I feel glad that I spent all that time, because it still informs my daily life every day. Last night I was looking at a book of Joseph Koudelka, one of my all-time favorite photographers. He's a Magnum photographer, and I know all those photos already, but it just never wears off. Like great music, like anything else.
What came first, photography or music?
Music, yeah, much more. As a real obsession. It's an interesting question, because I picked up photography pretty quickly after, probably around the age of 13, but I never looked at it as, I didn't understand at the time what I know now. Like music came in, wrapped my brain. Like photography was something that I was curious about, but I didn't feel that I had a clear sense of what I would do with it, or things like that. Today, it's actually feel that I'm much more interested, in a sense, for me, as a practicing, I don't do music at all anymore. I don't perform, I don't record, I've sold all my equipment, but I still take photos. I like the fact that it's a activity that I can do on my own, and it's entirely reliant on me, my eye, going out, thinking of something I want to shoot, or just looking around, etc. There's a certain freedom that comes with it. Music can be, despite being a self-contained art, right? You still have to deal with a lot of people. The worst is the film business. Totally collaborative. You cannot do anything on your own. Photography, I can just pick up my Leica right there and walk out the door and have an amazing experience and look at the world, force myself in the sense at looking at the world differently.
It seems like you like your photographers black and white. Why is that?
I like geometry, most importantly. I like the composition, and I think it takes away all the distraction that color brings. Also, I'm not very focused on the color palette. It's not naturally coming to me. Some people are brilliant at it. Brilliant. You look at a Steve McCurry or Ernst Haas or, William Eggleston. I mean, some of those photographers, color is what matters because they think like painters. I don't really think like a painter. I mean, it's also a lot of it comes from, the sort of artistic education that you sort of bring on board. For me, I come from as a teenager, really looking at all these amazing Magnum photographers from the 60s and 50s and 40s, and the Kappa and the Cartier-Bresson and the Seymour Hersh and all those guys who really where black and white was a medium of the era. That's a film that you had to use. Color was there, but was not useful. Again, technology. It's all about technology. Mm-hmm. Film color was extremely slow, incredibly slow film. So if you had to go shoot at dusk, you could not use color. You would have blur. The speed would be too slow. Black and white was the film you could use to go film, shoot at night in Mexico, wherever it was. If you were, one of these humanist, social, documentarian from the Magnum agency, that's what you used. It's also cheaper and also easier to develop. The latitude, what we call the latitude of film, black and white. Even if you overexpose or underexpose, you can pick it back up. You can't do it with color. At the time, you could not do it with color. It was dead.
Do you use film now, or you use
No, I use digital. I mean, I still have a film camera. I have a Mamiya film camera, but I don't really use. Unlike audio, where still maybe less now, but for a long time, tape. It was a superior, and I think still is today. I'm not as in tune what's going on, but tape was really an exceptionally hi-fi format. It's a pain in the ass to use. I mean, a nightmare to record to tape. It's a very tedious process, but it sounds incredible. Today, for me, the difference between film and digital is not even in the same. I mean, I just scanned a lot of my negatives, over the holidays. Actually, a lot of stuff that I had in storage. And you just realize how many times do I have water stains on it? And, if I slightly underexpose it, the noise and the grain just explodes. And nowadays, I could shoot, without even worrying about how I'm going to expose my photo. And I can, it's called stops, right? So if you shoot something that's underexposed, that's very dark, we've all had this, right? In our photos where something is barely visible. Nowadays with digital, I can just move the exposure slider, photos right there. I mean, I could have never done that in film, ever. So the other issue, suddenly the light changes. I've got the wrong ISO on my film. I'm at 100, I need 400. You got to roll it back in, change it. Now the ISO is automated. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing.
Yeah, technology is amazing.
It's funny, there was as you know, I'm totally obsessed with new technology, but there was a camera called the L16 camera. It was sort of a flop, but I bought the very first as soon as it came out. And it's what is called computational photography. It had 16 lenses, big, small, etc., on what looked like a giant iPhone. And you literally took a photo, and it took a photo overexposed, underexposed. So it's sort of an HDR technique, right? Where you get multitude of, and it took one on a zoom lens, one on a wide angle lens, etc. And within the camera would recompose the photo. So you could get something of close to 81 megapixel in quality from a camera that is the size of an iPhone. It is amazing. It never worked well, to be honest. It worked well in some instance, and when it did, it blew you away. But most of the time it was pretty mediocre. But the idea was brilliant. And so, you look at that, and if you think of what I used to do, what I used to carry, a full bag of film, and you had to keep it in the fridge, and and you had to write down what it was, and load it, and etc. There's a convenience aspect. There's also a quality aspect from digital that is unbelievable. At least, definitely in photography.
You came to the United States and you actually worked as a photographer.
I did some session work in music, and two things changed with music. One was the death of the studios. I saw that coming like a freight train. And I thought this is a losing battle. And you didn't have to be a genius to see it coming. I mean, suddenly all the studios shut down. Atlantic, Hit Factory, I mean, you name it. So, and I don't like playing live. I never liked it. It's not for me. I don't find the thrill of it. I hate being on the bus. I hate traveling in shitty conditions. So unless you get me touring with the Stones, you have the plane and everything's organized for you. It's not a great experience. So there was that. And then the second thing that happened is I hurt my wrist really badly. Up to this day, it still hurts when I play. If I play for an hour and a half, I'm in deep pain. And I never really recovered. And so that was really circumstances forcing it. But in a sense, it came at a time where a few things. One was obviously the shifting session scene, where you could tell that technology was having a huge impact on the recording industry. Pre-Napster, I mean, it was just in general having home studios and Pro Tools and Cubase and all the systems and Nuendo, etc. And then the other thing is also I didn't especially like having to do work that I didn't want to do in music. I mean, sessions that I would have to do. I mean, I remember doing like a Shell commercial. I mean, paid very well. I can tell you that much. It was for Shell France, actually, for Europe. But doing that music, right? And that's part of the bread and butter of what you do, and sometimes you do shit for, to eat, and sometimes you do it for the art. The problem is that doing stuff for the art was very rare. Unless you latched onto a band and you were the bass player in a band, and I really loved jazz at the time. I mean, it was my big obsession. So but those sessions didn't pay well. So all in all, you put all these together, and I thought, okay, the romantic idea that I had of the session player that came from the, again, 60s, 70s, right? Looking at the Steve Gadd and all those guys who are doing Steely Dan one morning and Paul Simon in the evening, it's not there. So what am I waiting for? So there was that. And then there was also the start of, and it really came from this really remarkable music executive called Seymour Stein, who had started Sire Records. I met him at a studio, and he put it in my head that I maybe should think about being a producer and finding artists. And that became that link, that shift, like where you suddenly say, well, I don't have to be on that side of the glass. I could be on the other side, the one that's putting the band together, putting the record together. And through that became a conduit towards the label side, right? The being actually on the other side, what Seymour was doing. He was part of Warner. He had signed Madonna and Talking Heads and the Ramones and Katie Lang, and you can go on and on and on. And so so he had done quite a lot of super successful, and I thought that's what I'm going to be doing. So that became that shift. But I again, part of the experience of playing for me was really that breaking down of the track. I really liked the arrangement side. Like I really liked it. Like thinking like a puzzle. Okay, what is the drum should be doing? Is there a coda? Should we double the time on this? Should we do a half time there? Should we do a break? Should we have a bridge? Do we move that part around? Etc. And I love that part much more necessarily than the experience of, playing itself. And so again, it's an iterative process where you start thinking about what you're doing and can I do something that may be more satisfying. One thing I never gave up until recently was really the recording studio. That I thought was a really fascinating process. It's really the kitchen, in a lot of ways. And I like the fact that the studio is that space where technology and creativity collide, right? That's where it comes together. And there's still sort of impermanence around it. There's a uniqueness where the space that you're in influences, and I don't mean mindset, it actually impacts the sound. Are you playing in an orchestral room, or are you at the record plant where it's a minuscule room? The console, the guitar, the amp, the strings, the string gauge. I can go on and on. Everything that you can think of impacts it. And if you can put all that into your database, plus having references from a million records that came before you, then that process becomes interesting. So you know what, that synthesizer, it should sound like the one on Steely Dan's, X record, right? And then you start putting all this from your little database, and in a sense, it confirms what Nora Ephron says, that everything is copy. In a lot of ways it is, right? Where you're thinking, well, but it becomes, because you don't have the same player, the same room, the same console, the same instrument, the same this and that, it becomes something else by nature. But so much of it is, for me in the studio, was trying to chase that sound that I heard when I was a kid. How do you get that bloody drum sound on Led Zeppelin 1, right? How do you get that kick drum, on that Joe Walsh record, or that piano, or this and that? And so that's never left me. I still today will catch myself.
One thing that puzzles me, like not that technical, it's bass, right? So you were playing bass.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you ask regular Joe like me about the bass player on a particular band, like Coldplay, I'll be like, I don't know who is the bass player there.
Right.
But you take bass out of the song, and the song sucks. Like somehow bass player never got the fair share of fame. People know the frontman, people know the drummer, nobody knows the bass man.
Paul McCartney.
Yeah, or like John Paul Jones. I mean, you don't know those guys. But
Yeah. So there's some, but look, the interesting instrument, because except for a few bass players, John Entwistle of The Who is one of those exceptions. Your job is not just to keep time, but it's to stay in the background. You should not think. I think a successful bass line should not rise to the surface too much. Even complicated, I don't say complicated, but complex bass players like James Jamerson from Motown fame, who could, had most insanely intricate bass parts, right? Very groovy at the same time. You should not really focus on it. You could sing it sometimes. If you think of the What's Going On bass line, it's it's a classic step ladder kind of bass line. But if you listen to that, it's there, but you shouldn't be thinking about it too much. So it's not a job that necessarily favors fame and attract attention, obviously, unlike a guitar solo, right? Or a piano player like Elton John or something like that. So that's not the measure of a great bass player. I actually remember I did some work for, I'm blanking out, is it some jazz player, not famous, but a jazz player. They come back to me in New York, and I got replaced in the session. It just was not, nobody, it's just not gelling, it's not working out. And I heard on the talkback that they brought a very famous bass player called Leland Sklar. Leland Sklar played with Crosby, Stills and Nash, and a lot of jazz fusion session with Chick Corea, and also with also played with James Taylor, etc. Insanely accomplished person. And so I asked to stay for the session. I knew that I was being replaced. I said, look, I just want to see what he's going to do. I'm just curious. It's like, what did I? And all he did was really simplify the shit out of the line. Just played pretty straight. And I thought, okay, well, there's a lesson there, right? That it's sometimes treating it to the service of the song, which I was trying to do as well. But I'm thinking more like a jazz rock player, and can we make it more complex and intricate and more pyrotechnics? And his view was like, yeah, it's unnecessary. Just going to play the notes. And so I think, it's not the instrument that's going to bring you great fame. That's for sure.
How did you actually start in the music industry as a job?
Well, the first thing was really trying to find those bands, to sign to labels. So really as a quasi manager, in a sense. I was lucky. One band called Blitz, rock band that got picked up by Warner, and so that got it started. But the big change for me was a couple of things. One, I got very lucky to work for a guy called Ahmet Ertegun, who was the founder of Atlantic Records, personally working for him. I was not working at Warner at the time, and just really quasi-assistant, but touching a lot of stuff that was very formative, just to see how you interact with, with artists. How do you think of an album, a record? How does a business work, etc.? So that's sort of your school in a lot of ways. And then I really went on the label side. So I worked for Sony Music for a couple of years, Sony International, international side. And that's, really seeing the machinery. Right? I mean, you see, how you put out a freaking Mariah Carey best of and a Ricky Martin record and, Titanic soundtrack and, just juggernauts projects in the days when labels were doing extremely well. So I'll skip some steps, but then, the one where I really got the sort of gut view of what a label does is when I joined the VP Records, the reggae label. It's a pretty substantial label. And people don't know it as a label, but it's a massive company. And that's really when you get to do everything. And I think it's a bit like an apprenticeship that you get at, in the old days where the cathedral builders in the Middle Age, would have to learn how to chop the rocks and shape it and how you do the cantilever and all those things. That's sort of that experience where suddenly I'm seeing I got to deal with manufacturing. How do you manufacture vinyl? And how do you time that? And how do you get credits on an album? And how do you get, to promote a record? And how do you sign an artist? And so, I knew a lot of those pieces individually, but I never had the opportunity to bring it all together in one place. And I think what VP Record allowed me to do is all this knowledge I'd accumulated on an ad hoc basis, sometimes through work, sometimes through trying to sign an artist to BMI, affiliate them or do a deal with Warner Chappell. I've done all this, but I'd never done it on a really in one cohesive place and on a consistent basis. And so suddenly at VP, I'm in charge, and I suddenly have to figure out all of that, right? And I don't have to figure it out. Obviously, there's the staff and there's the owners that have done it for eons. But it became really that school where you get to see literally everything from beginning to end.
You're the president, right?
Okay. Yes. Yeah.
I believe you guys were competing with Greensleeves, right? And then
Greensleeves.
Yeah. Okay. What were you guys doing that they didn't, and vice versa?
A couple of things changed. I think one, the owners of Greensleeves, one of them at least, Chris Sedgwick, lovely guy. Very interesting person, just wanted to stop. And so, they were struggling a little bit, but at the end of the day, I think he didn't have, his heart was not into it. And Chris wanted to go learn astronomy at the University of, I don't know which university in the UK. And so he decided to, exit. So he sold the label to someone else, not to us, to someone else. And that party just totally mismanaged it. Nearly ran into the ground. So it was sort of a distressed sell in a lot of ways. And
nice.
And so, but the other thing that happened is that at VP, we had started, unlike the old reggae model, the old reggae model is that a song pops up in Jamaica, you go pick it up and you license that one song. We started signing artists exclusively to recording agreements, just like it's done in rock and roll, right? My experience, obviously. And so doing that suddenly meant that Greensleeves used to go and pick up songs for compilations was locked out. If they picked up a song that really did well from an artist that was signed to us exclusive, we could shut it down. And so strategically became untenable for them, right? They couldn't have enough songs to put an album together. It's not the nicest way of conducting business, but it was effective. And so they ended up in a situation where not only the record business was way down. I mean, that's the worst of years. That's when Napster and all of those are picking up. And so we're getting hammered every year, losing 10, 15% down every freaking year for 10 years.
Wow.
So that was happening already with Napster. So very difficult. Managing decline, extremely difficult. I got to tell you, if there's one big lesson, what people should learn as managers is not to think like the Adam of Uber and all this bullshit that you read about in the press. Try to manage a declining business. That is the greatest lesson that you can learn about. Once you're in a situation where there's a growing market, you will do exceptionally well. But anyhow, so Greensleeves was really going down. And so at one point we got approached by the new owners, and they wanted to merge. And but I knew that we all knew that they were in trouble. And so so it became these very lengthy, unfortunately, it should have been much shorter, but negotiation to buy it. And then and that was done. And so and from there was really no more competition. The only other one was Jetstar. It's much smaller, but it was a British distributor and label. They went bankrupt. And so so that was it. Last man standing.
So and now VP is still around, right? They're doing quite well.
No, they have a huge catalog. They do very well. It's really a beautiful beautiful catalog.
So what saved the music industry? Is it Apple and streaming? What happened?
It's interesting, yeah, because it was going way down. I think, yes, Apple played a role in simplifying the experience of listening to music on a device. It's much simpler than having to upload an MP3 to this and that. It was pretty seamless using iTunes, right? You could just dump your song or download it, and off it goes into the you know, your iPod at the time. But you know, streaming, in a sense, at least on my side, you know, I always felt that was the outcome that we were going to get to. And it's not me just being visionary or whatever. You could see it with real networks. I don't know if you remember Real, the Real Player, etc. They are the music service, and they were streaming at the time. You could stream. Now the bandwidth was shit, right? The internet bandwidth was not great, so obviously it was not a great experience. But you could stream, so you knew the end game was going to be that. The question again was, how long is it going to take? How much beating are we going to take before we get there? And so when Spotify came out, I think, yes, they had a good interface. They also had great timing. I think everybody was ready, willing to support a new platform. The consumers had the ability to stream on the phone, where you had 3G was coming to the fore. Try to stream something in 2005. Good luck. Unless you were on the T3 line at work, you couldn't do it. And so I think it, again, timing was very beneficial to Spotify, and the interface was something you could make sense of. So I don't know if it's saving necessarily, but it certainly provided the path to say, okay, that's what we're all going to do. That's where it's at. And it's interesting to think about it, because now streaming, you don't really see what else is going to come after that, right? In a sense, I'm not saying it's the end, of any new platform, but that experience, I think mostly the improvements are going to be in the customization, personalization, the recommendation engines, etc., through AI, especially, and machine learning, which will do definitely a better job. I mean, honestly, those algorithms are not great. I mean, I see what I'm being served. It's not fantastic. And so I think the experience is going to be improved, but I don't think the delivery mechanism is necessarily going to change dramatically.
Well, to be fair, based on your taste of music, it's probably hard to kind of get what you like, because algorithms probably confused too.
I think it's the same experience for a lot of people, I gotta say. Unless you're a very obsessive fan, or you only do new metal or something that's very niche, it's tough. It's tough.
You didn't mention that you liked reggae previously.
I actually was not a reggae fan. I really got so before VP, I had a video production company called The Real Factory, and The Real Factory was doing a lot of documentaries and TV shows, stuff for MTV, MTV2, etc. And so VP was my client. I filmed their 25th anniversary concert, which I produced with them. Actually, I pitched them and said, look, since it's the 25th anniversary, you should do a documentary. So, and I decided I was going to go direct it myself. So I ended up doing the documentary. It was supposed to be more of an EPK. And when I got to Jamaica, I had two Panasonic cameras, and I took two Leicas with me. Actually, I was taking a lot of photos there.
Mhm.
And I just looked at this, and I got totally sucked into Jamaican culture, which is a infinite layer of complexity and, sort of the layers of the past, from colonialism to Spanish colonialism, English colonialism, and the Maroons, and it became fascinating. So for me, the real interest was Jamaican history and culture more than reggae. Reggae was just one of the elements, and I thought, okay, there's so much to unlock there that I want to join. And so eventually, a year later, I pretty much went to VP and said, look, here's an idea. Say, why don't you get into music publishing, into booking, into video production, etc. And we more or less accomplished over a 8-year period pretty much everything on the roadmap, except big failure on the booking agency. Not big, but just never took off.
Why did you decide to leave them? Because eventually you...
I felt I had done everything I had to do. It just felt like the end of the road in a sense. There were a couple of factors. One was that Jamaica was changing. It's pretty, I don't want to say dangerous place, because I never felt threatened at the time. But then the political environment around 2010 really started changing in Jamaica, and I didn't feel as comfortable as I used to in Jamaica. In the sense that if you go to Brazil, for example, as a tourist, it's fair game. You could be attacked, killed, robbed, you name it. It's a pretty gruesome place. Jamaica, as a foreigner, especially one working in music, you're totally sheltered. If you're a gangster, an athlete, or working music in Jamaica, you're royalty. So I never felt a sense of danger or fear. I mean, there's some stuff, that can be very aggressive and you're not comfortable, but never felt. And then suddenly in 2010, things started changing. And then really what broke everything for me is that one of the family who owns VP, the nephew, Joel Chin, got murdered. And there was a series of very violent period in Jamaica. There was a drug dealer called Dodos, who's now in jail in New York in Ithaca, and who ruled the drug trade. You can look him up in every documentary. It's DU in the US, and so very prominent drug dealer, and changed the power structure in Jamaica and unleashed a lot of violence. And I felt for the first time that I could be a target. And then he got proven true, tragically, with Joel Chin, who got murdered. And I mean, I got the phone call when he got murdered. I had to call his dad. And so for me, I was already thinking that, I don't know what else to do. I've already done everything that I felt we could do, or I could do at least there. Time to start thinking hard about what else to do, And so that decision was really, again, a mix of business, sort of rational decision, and also thinking that I don't think I want to go travel to Kingston, 30 more times. It doesn't feel like a great idea.
How did you meet Irving Azoff?
I was a consultant to Global Music Rights, which is his PRO, his organization. I already had the idea for Iconoclast. It was, in my head for a couple of years, as I mentioned before. And I pitched it to some investors, and it was not really happening. Main reason is that the idea of managing the brand rights felt very foreign to a lot of them. It didn't feel like something that could be done or had value or anything like that. I thought, well, if you think of Irving Azoff, you're thinking really legacy. And, you don't have to explain anything. Here's somebody who worked with the Eagles and Van Halen and Steely Dan and, and on and on and on in terms of legendary artists. So there was a natural partnership for me there, obviously. The other thing is that the job of managing and growing legacies is very similar to the job of a manager, one that deals primarily with classic artists, like he did.
Yeah.
It felt like a good thing. So I think, I mean, I'm not exactly sure in the sequence, but what I remember is that Tom Petty passed away, and Irving had gotten a call to manage, I think, a portion of the Tom Petty estate, maybe the wife, or can't remember who, the widow. I think it was a widow. And so we're talking about that, with his team in general. And that's when I thought, here's a case study of why we should do Iconoclast. So I presented the idea again to them, and this time it resonated because of the context of Tom's passing. There was some fundraising done, and after that, we bought Beach Boys, David Crosby, Stephen Stills was already in negotiation, and Linda Ronstadt, and those are the ones that we bought while I was there.
And then you decided to divest Iconoclast, or how did it work? Because it was called Iconic.
Yeah, the name, they didn't want to call it Iconoclast at the time. I think there was some reservation around what the true definition, historical definition of iconoclast means, which is destroying icons in churches, etc. Sort of like Genghis Khan. For me, it didn't matter because it's not what it means today.
Yeah, it sounds cool.
When you think of iconoclast, you think of somebody that's out of the beaten path, if you wish. And so I left in early 2021, and started thinking about fundraising, do the sort of a similar structure, and then I got introduced to actually a lot of investors. There was a period of a feeding frenzy for people wanting to put money at work that took tons of meetings. And the meeting with PIMCO, the person who works at PIMCO's guy, Ben, I'm not going to say his last name without his authorization, but when I met with him, he had done an incredible amount of research around music, which meant that when you asked me about the ecosystem and the shaky answer I gave you, I didn't have to do any of that. They had done they knew everything about it. And also I felt from a style, I didn't feel like I was really dealing with a bunch of A-type kind of banker. It felt very sophisticated, very thoughtful, very organized, very determined. And so I thought, okay, it's a bit like a marriage. I can wake up every day, talk to those guys, and some of them became friends. I really enjoy talking to them about anything. It doesn't have to be just about the business. And so it's probably the best relationship I've had with any financial sponsor in my career, by far.
What's your long-term view or vision, I would say, on Iconoclast?
I'd like to expand outside of music. That's really the main goal. Is how do we replicate the business model in film, TV, fine arts? I mean, broadly speaking, entertainment, IP. So think of somebody like Basquiat. Can you do something? Can you build a licensing model around Basquiat? How do you keep interest in his paintings outside of collectors at Sotheby's, Christie's, and wherever else? So thinking broadly along those lines. What else can you do in a world, again, where technology is going to have a huge impact on the ability to sustain these artists in a positive way? Where suddenly you can think that, going back to my example of Tony Bennett, but for another 120 years, 200 years, 500 years, can operate and perform and be someone that you want to have an experience with at parity with Harry Styles. Literally, right? I mean, I'm closing the gap suddenly. I'm not just selling T-shirts and doing a documentary. I can actually now have him be on the same stage as Harry Styles. perspective. It's not there, as I mentioned earlier on. Obviously, there's nothing around that, but I think it makes me think horizontally around all those different forms of arts and thinking there's so much to do with all of those. Think of a Frida Kahlo. Think of a Bruce Lee. I can go on and on and on and on and on. There's something to do there around entertainment IP that's going to involve technology and allow us to create opportunities, experiences, and even new art in some cases that would be absolutely respectful of the legacy of the original creator, but allow us to translate it into the future.
So it's clearly Iconoclast is in the, as Americans would say, early innings, right, of the journey.
It's only a year old. It's crazy to think about it, but it's a year old, but it's 30 years of preparing for this for me. So in a sense, the age of the company is totally irrelevant. And when I was describing my childhood, and saying, I used to read a lot, it's not because I want to boast or whatever. That's what you do when you're in a very small town and you really have nothing else to do. I mean, it's that, or you want to go at the local bar and play, fucking ping pong and have a spliff. I mean, cool, but that was not my trajectory. So now all this for me can come together under an umbrella where I'm saying, okay, well, if I love Sergio Leone, can I buy Clint Eastwood and we can start doing, continue that, those spaghetti Western, I hate that term, but the amazing Sergio Leone movies, can it continue in a digital age? Can it be a competing computer game to, what is it, Red, whatever it's called? I'm not a big
Redemption
gamer,
or
but
something,
right? That for me is exciting, where you take amazing IP and you figure out what else we can do, where can we take this, but it takes taste, which my team has in general. That's a big hiring criteria. It takes a lot of knowledge to really distill and understand the brand so that you don't screw it up. And it takes resources, which Pimco is bringing to the table, and others, just to be able to make that into a reality. So that's it.
So looking back at your 2.5, almost 3 decades in the industry, what are some most memorable moments?
Oh, that's a tough question. I couldn't tell you of memorable moments because it's too vague. I mean, are you talking artistically? Are you talking business-wise? Are you talking interactions? I mean, I feel for me, it's not even a memorable moment. It's really the privilege of working with totally exceptional individuals. I mean, they're modern day superheroes when you think about the artist, and also dealing with absolutely, as I said at the beginning, rarefied air. I mean, I feel literally every day I'm handling Harry Winston type of jewelry nearly on a constant basis. The fact that I'm, sitting here and after this, my mind is going to start wondering what I can do with Broken English by Marianne Faithfull or, a Donna Summer recording for Giorgio Moroder, or, whether there are more recordings between Bob Dylan and the band from the 74 tours, or can I do a virtual reality experience of Tony Bennett in Las Vegas, is enough. Like, I don't have to think as to, so yes, I could tell you that I've seen amazing concerts and meeting Ron Wood was a fun experience, and, it was very funny and blah, blah, blah. But that's, there's something bigger to do that for me. If I have to answer your question truthfully, the memorable moments will be is the accomplishment of being able to know that I'm helping maintain this legacy that they've created. I mean, that is no different than I'm sure the curator at the MoMA or the Louvre probably feels every day. Thinking, yeah, it's there and somebody else is going to be able to enjoy this. Now, being able to, I mean, there are, plenty of memories over the years of, from being arrested at the Canadian border because I tried to sneak in illegally for a gig, which I did, but on the way back, I forgot that I had not my passport. I'd left it at home, got caught. I'm still today going to see my friends at Nickelback in Canada. every time I cross the border, I get pulled over, and they still remind me that 22 years ago or whatever it was. So there's a lot of fun stuff. Seeing. I mean, I remember seeing this exceptional Joe Walsh gig, in New York. It was just mind-boggling. The first song that I recorded, in the studio, was an amazing experience. Being in a room with Glyn Jones during a recording, the guy, the engineer and producer of, who did the Beatles and did, Clapton, etc. An incredible experience, etc., etc. But again, it's in a sense, it's a life that I chose. I didn't think, in retrospect, that I would be doing what I'm doing today. It feels very far-fetched, when you're in a small village in France. If I were born in New York, it feels real. It feels like you can walk to the Heat Factory. That felt very far. But, I guess it's no different than anybody that works in the arts or sports. The mission, you become really imbued with this completely absurd sense that you're on a mission. And whether it's important or not important, in retrospect, I mean, time will tell. But I feel I'm a little contributor to continuing that magical story that all those artists have started. That's really what I do.
I have a quick blitz for you on the ending. I'll ask you a quick question and give me a quick answer. How about that? Good. What's your favorite movie?
Hopefully. I'm going to give you a list that I actually wrote over the holiday. It's how sad is that. Killing of a Chinese Bookie. Fantastic movie. The Thief. Great Michael Mann movie. The Long Goodbye. Altman movie. Mr. Klein. You can see it on Criterion Collection. Samurai. French movie with Alain Delon. Again, it's art movie. It's amazing. Death in Venice by Visconti. Beautiful. I love Annie Hall by Woody Allen. It's a fantastic movie and classic, obviously. Chinatown, the Polanski movie in '74, which is an extraordinary movie about, the plot is so complicated. It's about water in LA, which is actually a very current topic. And then there are a lot of French movies. I would say probably, my favorite movie is probably Vincent François Paul et les autres. I'm so sorry. I don't know if it's available in English. But it is Claude Sauté. He's the French director who sort of captured the bourgeoisie from the 70s in France and really a group of friends. It's one of my all-time favorite movie. And but that gives you a quick overview. And then there's a lot of, Once Upon a Time in America by Sergio Leone is a gorgeous movie. I can go on and on. I don't like when people say, but I don't say that. I don't like it. I mean, it's a fair question, but there's not one. It doesn't exist.
I didn't hear any Marvel movie there. I guess that's not what you watch. Favorite country to visit?
India. And France, sorry. And France.
Oh, you like France? Why? Yeah, I got it. Favorite historical figure?
Probably Richelieu. He was the French prime minister in France, and I get I don't want to say emotional, but it's very special because he sort of crafted modern France, and so many of the things that we take for granted and live with every day came from him, and that's one of the things I love about France is the weight of history on the national identity is at a level that there are few countries in the world that can claim the same sense of looking back sometimes to 800, right? To literally 1,000+ years ago and seeing things and reading about things that are totally part of your daily life, from language to culture to food to, institutions, etc. But Richelieu for me was one of the great leader, obviously of the 17th century, but also a remarkable person in terms of shaping, France, and which I'm very biased and proud to be. So yeah. And then I next to that, I probably put which is totally different, but John Lennon, I think has not necessarily the most important, but in my life, certainly one of the most important historical figures. Yeah.
Favorite cuisine? French?
Yes, 100%. And I cook extensively. My daughter's got allergies to food, some food. And so I have to cook. We have to cook all the time. And so it's absolutely And my grandfather was the charcutier, used to make prepared meals, and cured meats, etc. So I grew up in a very it's a bit like a butcher in France, right? I mean, sort of like a butcher, but not just meat. He's also doing a lot of cooking. So it's always been a huge part of my life.
What's the first item on your bucket list?
For when? So like retired?
I don't know, like anytime. Like what do you think? Oh, I want to do this before whatever.
I want to eventually, when I stop doing music, if it ever happens, or working in music, I'll go back to photography. And so there are a lot of things I want to do but really, there's a very general thing. I'd like to spend the rest of my lifetime, as gloom as that sounds, just doing photography.
What life advice would you give to your 15-year-old self?
Probably be more focused. I feel that, but I think it's part of the education and how you function. It's very easy to be judgmental and think, so spread out and doing too many things. And, but I think it's part of the path. You have to do too much to figure out what you want to do. But sometimes I feel that spent a lot of time doing things that with massive waste of time. So just being able to be focused. And then the other, actually, tell you what's a good advice, not just for me, for anybody that works in a creative field, is to not have a chip on your shoulder about the demarcation line between what's creative and what's business. And I was one of those. When I first got on the business side, I said, you know what, fuck this. I'm a creator. I'm a bass player. I'm a musician. I'm supposed to be a creative. I shouldn't have to deal with the business side. And that was probably something I should have taken a more moderate view about a long time ago. For a long time, I thought, I'm not dealing with the business. That's not me. And I got that advice later. I wish I'd gotten it earlier. But I met Ertugun, again, this amazing guy, amazing A&R. He's the one who really pointed out. He said, that I can't remember how he put it, but he said, the line that separates the business side from the creative side is, I think he said, was gray or blurry, something like that.
Huh.
And he was totally right. It's a constant dialogue between the two.
Well, Olivier, thank you very much for your time. It was
Thank
a
you.
great conversation. I really enjoyed it.